There are secrets buried so deep in the American landscape that entire generations have lived and died without ever daring to speak them aloud. And in the mist-covered hollows of Appalachia, one family became the living embodiment of those shadows, their story hidden behind sagging porches, rusted tin roofs, and silence so heavy it felt like a curse from the moment you set foot on the dirt road leading to Odd, West Virginia. You can sense it in the air, the way the wind hesitates in the trees, the way the birds fall silent, as if unwilling to bear witness to what waits ahead. This is where the Whittaker family has lived for over a century, locked away from the world in a cycle of isolation, poverty, and bloodlines twisted so tightly together that escape became impossible. When filmmaker Mark Whittaker first arrived, he expected hardship, but what he found instead was something the modern world pretends cannot exist. A family so secluded that generations had married within their own bloodline, producing children born into lives already haunted by the sins of ancestry. The first man to answer his knock did not speak in words but in guttural sounds, his body moving with nervous energy, his eyes darting like a trapped animal, and behind him shadows stirred figures half-hidden watching from the corners of a house that leaned like a man too tired to stand upright. This was not fiction, this was not myth, this was not a horror movie. This was America's most inbred family, living in plain sight, forgotten by every institution meant to protect them. The neighbors did not talk about the Whitakers, not in public. At least their name was spoken, only in whispers behind gas stations and grocery store counters. Words carried on low voices with eyes cast downwards. Children were told not to stare, not to ask questions, and, over time, silence became its own prison. But what silence concealed was something even darker, because the Whitakers were not monsters, they were not freaks, they were the result of abandonment, the price of a system that had turned its back long ago. Step through that doorway and you do not just see poverty, you see inheritance, an inheritance of neglect, of genetic consequence, of a world that carved out hidden places and left human beings trapped in them forever. You hear the rocking chair creaking in endless rhythm. You see a barefoot boy circling in the dirt, humming to himself. You notice the walls stripped bare of pictures, as if history itself had given up trying to be remembered. And when you stand there breathing the heavy stillness, you realize this family is not a rumor. They are living proof of how America forgets its weakest children and buries them alive in silence. They say the Whittaker family began not as a tragedy, but as a necessity in the forgotten folds of Appalachia, where isolation was both shield and shackle. Imagine land so unforgiving that neighbors were measured not in footsteps, but in miles, and survival demanded you cling to whoever was near. Even if that meant clinging too close too often, whispers trace their bloodline back over a century to when the town of Odd, West Virginia was little more than a scattering of wooden homes and a church that rang only on Sundays. The hills themselves became walls, keeping outsiders out and insiders in overtime. Love and lineage folded into each other until the branches of the family tree twisted inward the way a vine strangles itself. The town knew, but the town did nothing. Silence became the first accomplice. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones at gas pumps and on sagging porches. Yet no one intervened because in Appalachia, secrets are currency, and shame is locked behind closed doors. What began as cousins marrying cousins became generations repeating the same pattern, not by cruelty, but by inevitability, until children were born carrying both the legacy of their land and the heavy mark of genetic collapse. When filmmaker Mark Whittaker stumbled upon their story, it was as though he had opened a door into another century. He found a home that leaned like an old man tired of standing. He found eyes that stared not at him, but through him. He found voices that had been reduced to grunts, whispers, and silence. Yet behind that silence was something darker, something ancient. The evidence of what happens when a society allows its weakest to vanish in plain sight. The Whitakers were never myths. They were never monsters. They were the inevitable consequence of abandonment. Each face carried the weight of choices made long before their birth. Each body a living testimony to what happens when bloodlines coil inward without. What release their tragedy is not just genetic but systemic. Not just about family, but about how easily a nation forgets the people trapped in its shadows. And as you hear this, you begin to realize that the Whitakers are not an isolated case. They are a mirror. They are proof that what society ignores, it eventually creates in its own forgotten corners. The deeper you look into the Whittaker family, the less it feels like an accident, and the more it feels like design for how can a community exist for generations under the shadow of such visible suffering and yet remain untouched by intervention. It was not ignorance, it was indifference. The state knew, the town knew, the churches knew, and still no one came. Not with doctors, not with aid, not with anything except silence. You see, America has always had places it prefers not to acknowledge, places where the forgotten are stored, like unwanted relics locked away in the attic of national memory. Appalachia became one of those places. Mines closed, jobs vanished, and poverty dug its claws into the land deeper than coal ever had. The Whitakers are not merely a family. They are a case study in what happens when neglect is inherited, when institutions choose to look away rather than risk exposing their own failures. Mark Leiter's camera showed us what textbooks would never print: a boy humming wordless tunes, a man barking involuntarily in broken spasms, a matriarch whispering prayers over instant noodles. This was not just inbreeding. This was abandonment carved into flesh and bone and psyche. Generation after generation, each denied the possibility of change because to change would require someone powerful to care. Think about it. Power does not disappear. It shifts, and in this case, it shifted away from the hills, leaving only scraps for those trapped there. The Whitakers were born into a cage with invisible bars, bars made of bureaucracy, poverty, and shame, the same forces that still shape forgotten corners of this nation today. And here is where you must pause and face the truth. This story is not only about them, it is about you. It is about the systems that shape you, the hidden hands that decide who is seen and who is erased. Ask yourself how many other families, how many other towns live like this today, ignored until a camera stumbles upon them, left to rot in silence. This is the knowledge you were never meant to hold: the truth that invisibility is a weapon, and the Whitakers were its target. Now listen closely, because this is where the line between a forgotten family and the machinery of power becomes undeniable. The Whitakers are not just an Appalachian tragedy, they are a mirror, a reflection of how entire populations can be controlled not by chains but by silence. When a community is cut off, it does not need fences. The land itself becomes a prison. When the bloodline folds in on itself, it is not simply biology at work, it is social engineering through abandonment. Ask yourself why their story remained hidden for so long. Why did it take a wandering filmmaker to reveal what entire counties already knew? It is because shame is one of the strongest tools of control. And when shame infects a people, they will bury themselves willingly. They will police their own silence. The Whitakers lived under that weight for decades, not speaking, not asking, not reaching out, because the system taught them that they were unworthy of help. But here is the darker truth. It is not only the Whitakers who live under this curse. Every man watching this has been placed inside a narrative crafted long before he drew his first breath. You are told who to be, what to believe, what to consume, how to live. And the moment you step outside of that script, you are branded defective just like this family was branded abnormal. The chains may look different, but the method is the same. And this is where I ask something of you, because hearing this knowledge without acting makes you no different than the neighbors who walked past that house in Odd, West Virginia. I want you to write these words in the comments right now to lock this truth inside your mind. Write it twice, so it cannot be erased. The silence is the weapon. Do it and feel the shift, because once you speak it, you no longer stand with the forgetters. You stand with those who see you, stand with those who refuse to be blind. And in that act, you take back a fragment of the power stolen from you. This family's bloodline carries scars, but your bloodline carries chains, chains of thought, chains of control. And once you see them, you cannot unsee them. The further you go into this story, the clearer it becomes that what happened to the Whitakers was not an accident. It was not just geography or poverty. It was neglect, crafted by design institutions, know exactly where these families are. They have names, they have records, they have files stacked in dusty cabinets in county offices that no one ever opens, and still the silence continues. Why? Because neglect is cheaper than responsibility. It costs less to let people rot in isolation than to admit a system has failed them. The Whitakers lived in a house collapsing under its own weight, no running water, no working plumbing, no medical care, and yet the state claimed to know nothing about it. That is a lie. The truth is they knew and they turned away because admitting it would force accountability. Admitting it would reveal that entire regions of America are treated as disposable. And if you think this is only about one family, you are wrong. Entire communities are being written out of existence, small towns hollowed out by drugs, by poverty, by the slow bleed of industry stripped away until what remains is silence, and silence is profitable because silent people do not rebel. Silent people do not demand, they do not march. They do not vote. They do not matter in the machinery of power. Understand this. The Whittaker family is a symbol of what happens when human beings are turned into ghosts while still alive. A people locked away not by prison walls, but by the apathy of the institutions sworn to protect them. And here is the darkest twist. Once you begin to see this pattern, you realize it stretches beyond Appalachia, beyond America. It stretches into every system you touch: education, finance, media, all of them designed not to awaken you, but to keep you blind. The Whitakers live in physical isolation, but you live in psychological isolation. You are fed distractions. You are given entertainment instead of truth. You are handed arguments and division, so you never unite. And if you cannot unite, you cannot break the chains that bind you. Their house is a decaying structure in West Virginia, but your house is your own mind. And if you do not see the cracks forming, it too will collapse. This is the forbidden truth they never wanted you to see. What happened to them is a warning of what is happening to you. You have walked with me into the forgotten hills and stared into the eyes of a family turned into a warning. Now it is time to understand why you were never supposed to see them, because their story is not just their story. It is the mirror held up to your own life. The same forces that left the Whitakers invisible are working on you every day. They do not use chains. They do not need fences. They build walls inside your mind. Walls made of distraction, fear, debt, and noise. You scroll. You consume. You fight over scraps of information while the architects of your cage remain unseen and untouched. When a family is left to decay for generations, it is not only because of distance, it is because of design. And when a nation of men is left to wander, lost, angry, addicted, isolated, it is because of the same design. Power thrives on silence, on division, on men who have forgotten who they are and what they were meant to become. Look at the Whitakers again. See the way their names repeat across generations. See the way history loops, because no one intervenes. You are living inside a loop, too, a loop of habits, of debts, of illusions, a loop that keeps you from breaking free. The family in the mountains is the physical version of what has been built inside you. This is why I said from the beginning, this is dangerous knowledge, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Once you know the pattern, you can never go back to sleep. And that is what they fear, more than anything, a man who wakes up, a man who stops accepting the script he was handed at birth. If you feel the stirrings of that awakening inside you right now, if you feel the cracks opening in the walls they built around your mind, type in the comments, "I will not be silent." I will not be silent twice because repetition locks it in and signals to the algorithm and to yourself that you are choosing to wake up. This is not entertainment. This is initiation. You are standing at the threshold of forbidden knowledge, and only you can decide whether to step through. Now you know what they tried to bury. Now you have seen the faces. They wanted you to forget. The Whitakers are not just a family. They are a living prophecy, a warning carved into the hills of Appalachia of what happens when a people are abandoned and a system feeds on their silence. Their bloodline became a prison. But your mind does not have to be the same prison. You can break the cycle, you can shatter the loop. You can name the forces that profit from your blindness, and you can walk away from the script. They wrote for you. The only question is whether you will. Every secret they hide from you is a mirror of this one. Every crime of power is hidden behind the same curtain: isolation, secrecy, shame, repetition. Until you stop looking, until you stop asking, until you stop caring. But you have looked, you have asked, you do care, and that alone makes you dangerous. Look at their faces one last time and see not just tragedy, but truth. Because the truth is that this is not about them. This is about you. It is about what happens when a man wakes up, when a people wakes up, when silence ends and history begins to change. In the end, the Whitakers stand like a shadow at the edge of the American dream, and their existence asks you a question. No government, no church, no corporation wants you to ask, what would it look like if you stopped playing your assigned role? What would it look like if you built something different? If you are ready to answer that question, type, "I see the pattern. I will break the pattern" in the comments right now. Say it twice. Say it with power and let it echo, because the more of you who say it, the harder it becomes for them to bury the truth. Again, this is not the end of the story. This is the beginning of yours. Remember the hills, remember the faces, remember the pattern, and never forget that waking up is the first step.